Welcome to Nothing Without Us, stories and discussions about meaningful inclusion. We will talk about accessibility, true inclusion, and disability justice with stories, policy updates, discussions, and related commentary on the value of being accessible and inclusive. We believe life should be accessible for everyone, and everyone should be included in all aspects of life. I am your host, Annette Bourbonnier. I am a 70-ish-year-old woman with short gray hair and eyeglasses. I am sitting in a power wheelchair, and my service dog Kirby could show himself at some point during the podcast. This podcast is captioned. Please press the subscribe button at any time during the podcast if you have not already done so. It will not cost you anything, but it will help us make this podcast grow. You are also welcome to make comments in the chat and to give us feedback about what you do or do not like. We especially appreciate a thumbs up. All right. Okay, so today's show is a continuation of the Crip the Vote series, where we engage office holders and candidates in discussions of disability issues. I'm honored to welcome Congressman Amo, who represents the 1st Congressional District in Rhode Island and is my congressman. So welcome, Congressman Amo.
Thank you so much for having me, Annette.
Okay. So, persons with disabilities represent between 20 and 25% of the U.S. population, and that makes us the largest minority in the country. However, discussion about disability is never included in campaigns or other public appearances. So this sub-series of my podcast is to engage people like yourself and other office holders and candidates on disability issues. And we accept that you're the new kid on the block. We cannot expect you've got a huge body of work, but you are, willing to listen, and, we will look forward to some great things in the future.
Yes. Well, look, I'm grateful to be on here, and in so many ways, we have to fill in the gaps for a missing segment of the discussion as it relates to equity in our country. Right. As you identified, 20 to 25% of the population here in Rhode Island, 240,000 people would be considered disabled. Right. And so it is missing such an important part of our community from the discussion. If you think about a world, right, where there are rules, there are decisions made, there are so many processes and procedures that are executed without thinking about those who are differently abled.
Right. Okay, so we will use disabled.
Yes,
is a good term.
Disabled,
yes,
great.
Right. Okay, cool. Yes, no, I appreciate you understanding that, and also the fact that we mentioned it while waiting that there is this significant intersectionality as well. Disability does not discriminate by race, gender, sexual preferences, religion, socioeconomic status. It hits everybody. And we have open enrollment all the time, by the way. Not that people are looking for this, but it does exist. As you get older, you're even more likely to have a disability. In fact, we used to refer to people that didn't have a disability as able-bodied, and now the term is usually not yet disabled. Mm-hmm. Sorry about that.
Well, look, as I tell people all the time, in the game of life, the only person who wins is Father Time. Right. And so we all have a day where we will express and demonstrate a disability that requires a system that is supportive. And on that note, speaking of support, we know today is that we're filming the first day of the Paralympic Games, and we want to cheer on all of those who are representing us in our country as they go to compete, using the abilities they have to strive for gold.
Right. Yes. Go USA. Yes, for sure. So we have our, the basic safety net program for people with disabilities in the U.S. is the Social Security disability system. But truth be told, once you acquire a disability, you are almost certain to be plunged into poverty. And one of the problems with that is trying to get your benefits in that whole period while you're waiting. Now, we know that there's a process, pending bills, right?
Yeah.
To decrease that 6 month waiting period where you have to have that disability for 6 months before you can even be qualified. However, an even bigger problem though is the actual process from applying until you get benefits, between reviews and denials and more reviews and appeals and all of that. It can take up to 2 years, and it often does. And if the person with a disability goes to work during that time to try to keep body and soul together, their
penalized,
their application is ended.
Yeah.
So anything that you know of on the horizon to change that?
Well, there are pieces of legislation to shorten and eliminate that wait time that I'm supportive of as well. And I think to zoom out a little bit, the Social Security Administration as a whole is an agency that is self-identified that those wait periods are bad and ineffective and hurt people. That's coming from the agency itself. And so in Congress, we have to do what we can to fund and support the SSA way beyond what we're doing. We need to modernize the agency. We need to modernize the benefit structure so that it meets the moment for people and that they aren't plunging into poverty. The whole genius of President Roosevelt was to keep people out of poverty through Social Security. That's what we have to solve for. And so I'm hoping that we can continue to do some work on that. And in fact, one of those pieces that I'm very focused on is enabling marriage equality for those who are disabled, for disabled adults. And the issue here is there is a substantial ceiling to the amount of income you can collect, which would only drive people into poverty. You put this together. So I met a young man when I was campaigning last year who said to me, Gabe, you need to fix this if you get to Congress. So I've co-sponsored a bill with Jimmy Panetta, congressman from California, to deal with those income thresholds and make it possible for people who want to get married, who are disabled, who are collecting benefits, to not be hurt by the system as it is today.
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah, because the issues of income limits and asset limits is just really, it's oppressive.
Yeah.
So the other part is we're always being threatened with, the trust fund doesn't have enough money, and so therefore, we get COLA increases, but not substantial increases. And I'm an economist, so I know, how much we're taxed on. The Social Security tax is taken out of an individual's pay up to $168,600 a year.
That FICA, yeah.
Right. After that, you're, you don't have to pay into the system. However, that makes the people with lower incomes bearing the whole burden, and we have an opportunity. We have people making far more than that, and it's not a big burden on them to continue paying it, either to raise the limit substantially or, in my view, eliminate the limit. Is there a
Yes, and it's an issue of fairness, or is what the capacity in our system of taxation. That's how it works. And so one of the pieces of legislation that I'm supportive of is called the Social Security 2100 Act, that modernizes Social Security, raises that base benefit that hasn't been raised in decades, and additionally finds revenue by lifting that cap, and also getting additional revenue from corporations. And so what we can do is deal with this challenge by being forthright about strengthening that trust fund, raising that revenue, making the benefit more substantial, because ultimately in our system we will be paying for it in other ways if people are driven into poverty. So we want to keep people out. And in that legislation, we also fund the Social Security Administration so we can deal with things like having an accessible application process and other procedures that take into mind that disabled folks are engaging with the system as well.
Okay. Well, that's good. That look forward to that coming through, and please keep us informed of
We
the
will.
legislation. Really would like to know that. You want to look at a little bit about some Rhode Island specifics,
Let's
seeing
do
as
it.
you represent us.
Yes.
We've talked. I've talked in the past about the Olmsted decision and the need for states to have an Olmsted plan. And Rhode Island is in the minority of states that does not yet have an Olmsted plan. But truth be told, we seriously lack the infrastructure. A lot of things have just not been dealt with for years, between healthcare, transportation, housing, a lot of things that need to be dealt with. But one area, we don't have all day, so we'll just focus on one area that I think is something that can be addressed fairly soon, and that's the issue of transportation. We do not have a reliable, accessible system of public transportation. RIPTA is very much like it was when I was in high school. It just had a different name then. Actually, the buses came more frequently then. This is, part of it has to do with the way we fund RIPTA in this state, which is kind of backwards. It's guarantees, it's failure. But we're a small state. We should be able to have a plan and have some rapid transit, have something that actually works on a reliable basis. It would be good for the environment as well as for people who can't drive, or people like me. I drive, but boy, you have no idea what it costs me to have a van that's accessible. So, we've got these infrastructure funds coming through. Is there anything we can do with that to revamp our transportation system so we have something useful?
Yes. Well, as someone who rode a lot of RIPTA as a young man, and in fact, I occasionally will hop on a bus coming back from TF Green or from just running an errand down the R line in Providence.
Right.
I'm very mindful of the need to invest in our transportation infrastructure, specifically our public transportation via RIPTA. There are things that we're doing with some of those infrastructure dollars, getting new buses, electric buses that whose accessibility functions aren't as wrought as buses of the past. I've been on many a times on a bus where the driver had to go by someone in a wheelchair because they said, I can't actually take you on because the seat belts aren't working or the other apparatus. So those modern buses, that's one step. But I agree with you wholeheartedly. We live in a small, dense state. We should be able to rely on public transit to move about, and most people are moving in a really tight radius, right? It's not like people are crossing from Westerly to Woonsocket every day. You've got people moving in very tight spaces, and so it's essential that we invest here. And I'm going to continue to look to the federal resources that came out of the infrastructure law, but I also think the state needs to help, and I believe that they have goals to make this system more sustainable, make those routes more efficient, make it so that when people come to this state, not everybody has to buy a car to be able to carry on their lives. And so you have my commitment that I'll continue to find whatever avenue, no pun intended, to go down to support our public transportation.
Okay. Bus A.
Yes.
Yeah, I often think in terms, and this is just my thing, if we had a rapid north-south with smaller routes that looped on the sides with smaller buses, it would not take large buses to do these loops on the side. But if we had a really reliable north-south and those smaller routes, we would just do so well.
I think so.
And we need it.
But this is a time for vision,
Right.
right? We have to think about what we want Rhode Island to look like in
Yeah.
the next 50 years.
Yeah.
And I hope that's a vision that includes reliable public transportation.
Okay. Thank you for that. So, anything else that you want to say about disability issues or comments you want to add before we?
Yeah, well, I hope that, my constituents, the constituents I get to serve, that I work for in Washington, know that I care about them in every form. Black, white, Latino, disabled, not disabled, everybody across the spectrum, regardless of what community you live in. And so, I'm hopeful that this setting is one that starts a conversation and continues a conversation that I've had around disability issues, and where we aren't doing the work, hold us to account. Tell us where we need to be doing better, and I will demonstrate, with my time and focus, that this is a concern, a priority, and one that I hope to work on for a time to come.
Well, I appreciate that, and I do hope we have these conversations again. We don't have to wait for elections.
Exactly. We don't have to wait.
No, we don't. So I thank you so much, Congressman Amo, for joining me today. People with disabilities need to have our voices heard.
Yes.
And I thank you for listening to that. So thank you for listening. I'm Annette Bourbonnier from Nothing Without Us, Stories and Discussions of Meaningful Inclusion. Please hit the subscribe button and give us a thumbs up. If you enjoyed this episode, please tell your friends and help this podcast grow. I appreciate all your comments, and I read them all too. Tell us who you want to hear from and what issues you want to hear, and I will be happy to forward any questions you have for the Congressman to his office. You can find us on patreon.com and on YouTube, and you can follow me on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Threads. Remember, though, and I say this at all of these subseries, our democracy depends on everyone getting out and voting. You cannot complain about the results unless you do. So until the next Nothing Without Us, I'm Annette Bourbonnier.